I'm showing now is a steering column repair kit from Napa Auto Parts. The labeling on the box is rather curious. The one thing that this kit does not have in it is any kind of switch. So curious labeling, but it comes with a this plastic replacement collar. Here's the original. This screw right here is the reason that we actually had to buy the kit. It locks the lock cylinder into place. For some reason our Camaro did not have one. Now there may be a GM manual somewhere that says this is how you completely assemble a GM steering column from scratch. If so, I have not seen nor read that manual. Can the center tube move? Can it go up and down?
Yeah, about like that much.
Well, you're probably going to need every bit you can get.
Yes, probably. But
there are slots. There are 2 slots in the central tube. And this clip has a couple of indentations that need to fit into those 2 slots. As much as that central tube is able to move, I think that the tube needs to come up as much as possible, or else the clip cannot possibly be put into the slots.
And I agree.
So you're grabbing the very most outside ring, lifting up, and that's pulling up the central tube?
Yes, they're connected.
That is not connected to what I'm holding in my hand, sort of, let's call it the middle tube?
Yes, the middle tube is one piece, and the outer and inner tubes are one piece. Come on. There we go. We have this clip that reaches all the way around here, and it's kind of C-shaped, right? But on the sides, we have these flat points, and on the inside here you can see the flat points poking through, and you can see that on both sides, and so I know that it's locked in.
Here comes the steering wheel pivot. I'm calling it the base. I don't know if that's what it's really called, but it's the bottom half of the 2 pieces that allow the steering column to pivot, and there's only one way it can go on, because the holes are not spaced symmetrically. As we were taking this thing apart, what we found out was that these bolts were loose, which is very scary. We're using Loctite 263, which is the only put this on for permanent applications thread locker. And we have a female Torx E8 socket. All of these bolts have been cleaned simply by wiping them off. And this Loctite 263, which is often called red Loctite, but it turns out there's more than one type of red Loctite. Like I said, it's the one you use if you don't intend for the bolt to ever be taken out again. Considering this car made it over 40 years without these bolts being taken out, I would say that's approximately the right length of time. You'll notice that Dylan is sort of naturally using a star pattern, which is good practice. It's good habit to get in. There's no downside, and depending on what your beliefs are, mechanically speaking, it may be better than just going around in a circle. Okay, just a quick look at the replacement ignition switch that we're using. And here's the part number 1990096. Ignition switch with tilt. This is the rod that slides the ignition switch back and forth mounted somewhere about here on the steering column. See the two mounting points for the ignition switch? Here's the slider spot for this rod. Depending on how you have the collar here, it can be in such a way as to where you can't slide this sliding piece up in there. It can block it. So the first time I tried to slide it in there, it was blocked. If you just take this outside collar, rotate it counterclockwise as far as it'll go, that slot will be uncovered. This long skinny part here can slide up in that slot and you are good to go. There's a groove right here, and this is the correct orientation of this piece right here, and Dylan's put some grease on it so that it will slide easily for years to come, and he's got it in there so you can see that it slid there. It slid right to the end there, and then here comes the new ignition switch, which we haven't actually figured out the purpose of this little blue plug yet, but I assume we will sooner or later. And now Dylan's going to show how that rod inserts into a slot, a black little well, I guess the color doesn't matter, but there's a slot in the ignition switch. And how does that rod move?
Well, not easily.
Is this where the plug has to come out?
Oh, you could be exactly right. Well, shall we try it?
I suppose.
Okay.
Bye-bye, little blue plug. Your life was a mystery. We never really knew you.
Well, now it moves easily.
Then there's probably only one right way to do it.
Yep. But I don't know what that way is yet, so we'll have to sit around and figure that out in a second.
Okay, so you have the end of that rod back in the same slot where it was.
Yep. There.
Okay. So this probably will be used, so I want to know how it goes.
That goes in there like that. They all line up, and then it snaps on like that.
We're going to be using this real soon in our rebuild. It's part number A8100507, a 69 to 02 GM steering shaft bearing. Our steering shaft has some nicks in it, and we're about to be sliding an O-ring at the center of a bearing over these nicks, and not wanting to damage the O-ring, we're smoothing out our steering column. We got some 400 grit sandpaper here, and we're doing final smoothing on our steering shaft. Don't want any nicks in the shaft to damage the center O-ring in our new bearing. Because this is a complete rebuild, every piece has been fully cleaned, and even all the old grease removed, and now Dylan is going to lube the crap out of it because we don't really want to ever be doing this again.
Okay, now if you can still see it, there is a groove here, kind of around the center, that is shaped like this.
Kind of reminds me of one of those things you might see in like an Indiana Jones movie where you have to put the piece in the right shape. And
it's a symbol.
The secret door opens and...
Yeah. So that goes in there like that. And then this one has the exact same shape. And you close it around there like that. So those go together like that.
So see this kind of shaped like a C? There's a groove right here that's worn. It's either worn or was originally put in the C, and it's for the clip. That metal clip that he inserted between the two plastic halves, it rests or it rides against this spot right here. Okay, so there's metal clip exposed right there where my finger would be touching if it was a little longer. Yeah, we see it. And so it, as you put it in there, and turn it, we are being specific and getting the clip to go right back into the groove where it obviously had spent so much time before. So my finger is pointing at the clip wear groove.
There's the other half of the clip.
There's the metal clip. So as you put that up, yes, okay. So you'll want lots and lots of grease in this joint, everywhere in this joint. Especially anywhere where the metal is contacting the plastic. That's what you want to slide well. What we have now is a tilt steering column shaft that is very well greased, and the tilt area pivots nicely, and we're ready to put it back in our steering column. This is the official bearing packing. I think you need to come in from the other side, Dylan.
Well,
look, if you look at it from the other side, see how you can see the little bearings in there?
Yeah.
This will continue until this bearing is stuffed full of grease. Okay, so you're getting it. If you kind of hit a point where it doesn't want to go on, then I think you're going to want to get a socket that is big enough to go on there and allow you to tap against it. All right, so just take it easy and see if you can tap that sucker on there.
Well, that was actually super easy. Barely an inconvenience.
So see how this fat part here fit into the slot on the column. Another tab here and another one around the back side fit in. And now all we have to do is put the cap on it and put the clip on it, and we'd be done.
Yes, that's like that.
I'm just showing the new clip and the old clip side by side for this lower bearing on our upper steering column. What I'd like to point out is that this ridge here on the original clip is a little bit higher, or you could say deeper, than the one on the reproduction. And I feel like the same is true for this and this. I just feel like on the reproduction none of them would go quite as deep, which would mean that theoretically they might not do quite as good a job of retaining the cap that holds this bearing in. For the quality reason that I already illustrated, we're going to use the original clip and not the reproduction clip. Everything else is in our replacement kit, or from our replacement kit. The positivity of that click and the way that locked in there makes me feel really good about it. Okay, this is technically another disassembly step. Basically, we're looking at this piece, which has already been cleaned up. But in our rack kit that we have, which, just for the record, this rack kit is part number 0784461. This rack kit includes 2 new bearings, and what they basically do is go on either end of this, and they both bearings come with a new outside race. One of them comes with a new inside race. Well, what we've noticed is this part has the old outside race still pressed into it, so we've got to get it out. It's not the one at the top of the column, it's not the one at the bottom of the column, it's the one in the middle. This is our new bearing, and there's a little plastic, I don't know what you want to call it, defect, and Of course, we believe that paying attention to detail gets you good results. So we're gonna file this little plastic defect off. Got it?
Yep.
Just a light coat all the way around. The plastic is centered on top of the balls on this side of the bearing, but if you flip it over, it's not centered at all. It's way to the outside. It's almost as if the balls could just fall out to the inside. What keeps them from falling out, though, is that there's an inner race. So these are very much directional bearings, and the side that's going to be against the inner race should be the side that has the balls much more exposed like they are on this side.
Exactly.
Okay, so with all that in mind, which side goes down into our piece here?
This side.
The side with the plastic centered, so that the side with the balls exposed stays up?
It should be.
So are you gonna install the other one now, or?
Yeah, pretty much. That'll do it.
We're reassembling this guy. There are little plastic pieces that we took out of there, and there. They're so insignificant that they don't even show up in the factory assembly manual. Exploded diagram of the entire steering column. They literally don't show up. But I don't think the engineers put them in there for no reason. So since we don't know what the reason is, we are assuming that we need them, and we're putting them back in. As we do not want these to come out and fly around, we want them to just stay put. We're putting a little bit of black silicone on them to act as a glue and just hold them in place.
Reverse crane game.
This is a new slider that came with our kit. In fact, we got a couple of them in a couple of different kits. Okay. Now, are you able to see when that is in the proper position?
I could feel it.
Can you pull it forward? Can you slide that ignition switch? There's a peg in there. And, okay, so what he's doing is he's getting the end of the slider over that peg that slides. So I guess you could push it back if you want. Now you can see fully how that piece fits in there, how it's hooked behind that pin. So these are the tilt position teeth. They were greased when we took this thing apart. They shall be greased when we put it back together. Now Dylan's just greasing the pivot for the tilt bar, the tilt lever that you pull when you want to change the position of the steering column. And now Dylan is effectively packing the bearings with grease. Okay, there's the second of our two new bearings up top, and this one's getting a good coat of grease too. Okay, here goes that clip. All right. And Dylan's presumably going to grease it here in a second so that the slider can slide on it. spot. It's just a simple matter of... So what Dylan's doing now is he's getting the teeth for the column tilt engaged. What we've ended up with is a column that's more or less straight at the moment. Yeah, you know what you could do too?
What?
You set the butt end of the steering column on the floor, and you could come down with a big socket around this, and you could just knock it on so easy. Whoa, fucking shit. You might be collapsing this collapsible steering column. It's not funny, Dylan. So you're fairly sure the holes are lined up?
I made sure of it.
That's lined up. Okay. You can see that on the second try, Dylan was able to tap it in until it was flush with the surface.
We are going to insert this rod into this hole right here and hook a spring around it. This hooks around there. Sits like that.
And we are left to just figure out what this end hooks on later.
Yes. Take this rod and put it through this hole right here. Okay. These need to stay in place. And then...
Okay, so it looks like you're holding this rod up from the bottom.
Yep.
And this one, what, is it in the right position?
Yeah, it's just kind of chilling in its correct spot.
Okay.
So now this gear has to lock onto it there. And this needs to be pushed back a little bit.
So there's a big notch on the silver piece. It's right there. There's a big hump on this black piece that has the gears. Those two, if you put them together, we think you're good. This rod has kind of a flat spot, and that flat spot goes up and over this edge on the black gear piece. And it can slide back and forth even with the black gear in place. Can you push that spring down in its little groove by hand?
Yes.
Okay, so it sits down in that slot easily?
It does.
Right. What size bolt head is that?
1/4.
Okay. And the sole purpose of this bolt is just to hold that spring in place?
It seems to be, yes. Alright, we're greasing this pivot cup. And then it goes inside of this spring here, which then goes down through this hole to pivot on a pin down there. Then this...
You will not be doing that by hand.
Unlikely. Alright, we're gonna screw this in here because we need to tilt this column as much as possible to have the least amount of tension possible on this spring that we're installing.
How does that spring get locked in?
There we go, got it. Well, we're gonna put this piece back in there.
And what is this piece for?
It is for turn signals.
Okay, so this is the new plastic cover.
Grease this pin up real quick. And then it's not really interested in going farther than that.
Okay.
So that's where it's going to stay.
Here's two plastic covers. This is the original, this is the new one. We've already moved the turn signal apparatus from the old one to the new one. There's also a ignition key present buzzer switch that we've decided not to move. The number one reason being that even if we did move it, the wiring harness, the painless performance wiring harness that we're putting in the Camaro, does not have that feature. Therefore, there's no point in moving the switch. We have this part number 1995963 OER turn signal switch. We have a special guest today. This is Kaylee of 1966 Mustang fame, and she's dropped by the 1980 Camaro studio to help us out with unboxing this turn signal switch.
Wow, that's a really nice turn signal switch.
Dylan's going to route it down through the plastic cover. So there's a serious decision to make about which side do you have towards the inside, huh?
This side. Now we're going to add this defensive sheathing around the wires, like so. Hook the wires inside, run this up the length of the wires. And put this over those, just like so.
We just want to illustrate one quick thing. Can you show the difference in length between the wires on the new switch and the old switch?
So here's the top of the new switch, here's the bottom of the new switch, this is the length of the wires in between. Here's the top of the old switch, the bottom of the old switch, and the length of the wires in between.
And when it comes to mounting the switch, which I'm pretty sure this is what this little clamping spot is on the steering column, when it comes time to lay this down and hook everything up, we may have some extra wire here. So extra length in some cases is good, but this is not one of them. This is a little piece of the housing that the turn signal stock comes out through this hole right here, or right here. This is the original, this is the aftermarket one from Napa. They look very similar, and they are similar, but they're not identical. If I put them like this, the plastic on this one around the hole extends way down. In fact, it comes to here. The plastic on this one, it just kind of ends. So looking at the slot that the turn signal stock comes out of, in this one the plastic comes up to here. In this one, there is no plastic in that area. It's just air. On this one, which is the original, there's a little metal shield that attaches to it, and Dylan will show how it attaches. Okay, so we were puzzling over what is the purpose of this little metal shield here. The best we could come up with is that when it is installed, it prevents someone from having access to these gears right here, which if you have access to them, then you have the ability to move the ignition switch to run and to start. So we think this is part of an overall anti-theft scheme. This anti-theft clip can still be used with the new part, even though they're different. Dylan is positioning this piece so that if you look down in there, the turn signal stalk can be threaded in. Okay. Here comes the outer housing, which with some level of force, Dylan is squeezing all the way down. It stops when it hits a lip on the aluminum inner housing. It's time to install the lock cylinder. Now, Dylan, how do you know if it's going to line up with the little bar at the end?
Well, it'll go all the way in.
Lock the cylinder lock using the lock screw. By the way, the threads on this screw are kind of short. They're maybe 3/8 of an inch long, and the plastic housing does not have pre-cut threads for them. The screw cuts its own threads. It's basically a self-tapping screw. With the installation of that screw, the cylinder is not coming out. In order to install the lock cylinder screw, the turn signal switch had to be out of the way. Now the lock cylinder screw is installed, so Dylan can go ahead and install it. He's got to pull on one end, the lower end, while kind of guiding the switch in. If you pay attention to the depressions in the case, the turn signal switch will line up with the depressions in the case. This plastic case right here is part of the Napa GM steering column repair kit. In this spot right here, the threads in the aluminum housing can't even be reached because the hole in the plastic isn't centered. Without it being centered, it's off to one side and it's partially covering up the threaded hole in the aluminum. So we're going to have to drill out this housing, and I really just don't think that we should have to do that. We're going to install 3 screws that hold the plastic cover to the steering column housing, as GM calls it, which is the aluminum piece that really is kind of the core of everything that all the moving parts go into. Now the hole that Dylan is screwing to right now is the one where the Napa replacement part had the hole drilled off center. If you have watched our awesome disassembly video of this steering column, a careful observer may have noticed that these screws were not taken off. That's not because that step was left out of the video, it's because these screws weren't present during the disassembly. The fact that the holes are there, they're threaded, and they're available makes us think that it's a good idea to put them on, but full disclosure, they were not there when we took this thing apart. Alright, now we're coming in, we're going to secure our turn signal switch with some brand new screws. In order to do this, we have tapped the new plastic housing with 1032 threads. Which one is the one? I guess the short screw.
It's this one. It's this one.
We're about to insert the turn signal stalk, but I want to say that we cleaned up these threads and the threads on the stalk, and it turns out that they are 1/4 28 threads. So now Dylan is planning to use a little bit of the blue Loctite. That is way too much.
A lot of blue Loctite.
what we're doing now is connecting the turn signal stock to the turn signal switch. And that metal piece that Dylan is fiddling with right now, is it in there good?
Yes.
Okay. It's held to the plastic turn signal switch with a screw that quite frankly it looks a little bit too big, but it is the right screw. The screw is going into an area that is not threaded, so it's difficult to go into the first time. Hopefully you can see that there's a bearing down there. Dylan's now installing the center race as opposed to the outside race, and a cap whose job seems to be to keep pressure on the inside race so that the bearing doesn't get sloppy.
Just like so.
Then comes a plastic ring that we kind of question what its true purpose is, but it was in the stack that we took off, so we're putting it in the stack that we're putting on. Then comes the spring, whose job I think we understand very well. And then comes the turn signal cam, and this is a newish turn signal cam that was installed by Dylan. And he has 0 miles on his car since this turn signal cam was first installed. And then we have this lock plate that has a notch for the turn signal cam. And if you look carefully at the inside of the lock plate, you'll find that there's a space where there's kind of a tooth missing. In other words, if the spacing was the same between all the other teeth, there's one spot where it kind of is doubled up. There's also a spot like that on the center shaft. Those two things need to be aligned, and then you know you've got the lock plate in the right position. Okay, when you're assembling your stack, there's several things to think about. One is the teeth on the lock plate. There is a unique position that is correct. You want to get them lined up. Second thing you need to think about is having that lock ring already on there and in the stack. Otherwise, depressing the plate is not going to do you any good because you can't lock it in place because there's no lock ring. Okay. Now, once you've kind of wrestled this thing into place, the other thing you want to check is that your teeth on the lock plate and your center shaft are still aligned correctly. Go for it.
Which they are.
Okay. All right. One limitation of our little homemade tool is that this nut, by the time you get it started and you account for the thickness of our plate, you can't really take it in very far. So then you end up tightening the side bolts, which is fine. As long as you do them a little bit at a time on each one and keep them about even. Now I will note that GM does recommend using a new one of these lock rings every single time you put this thing together.
Mm-hmm.
We looked all around the garage and could not find a new one, so we're reusing the old one. Both sides in good?
You think so? Yeah.
Okay. So I'm looking at that snap ring and just trying to convince myself that it's really seated good. I guess so.
Mm-hmm. That's about the level of confidence that I feel also.
You know what's interesting is Dylan used to talk more during these videos than he does now. No comment from the Dylan. What kind of Phillips screwdriver you got there, Dylan?
Number 1.
So would you say that's the correct screwdriver for the hazard thingy?
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty good.
We're going to have a small functional test. Turn signals appear to be working fine. Dylan is surprised by the springiness of the tilt action. There's our beautiful aluminum housing. Oh, look, it goes up too. All right. So the tilt function's working. What just happened?
I guess that's this start button. I don't know. Okay.
Not very sure about this popping.
Hazard